The metal-infused run-and-gun Valfaris was developed by Steel Mantis and released on the Nintendo Switch back in 2019. It was a game I had a lot of time for. I'll put a link to my review in the top right hand corner, and its sequel, Valfaris Mecha Therion, is also about to release on the Switch, albeit this time in the form of a shoot 'em up. Will it be just as metal as its predecessor, or does the decision to go down the shoot 'em up route mean they've shot themselves in the foot? Well, thank you to the publishing team for the review code, and now let's find out. Let's start with the story then, and it's quite a simple affair. It picks up right at the end of the original Valfaris game, with lead protagonist Therion leaving the world of Valfaris to chase the antagonist of that game, his father, and finally put an end to their conflict. He dons a mech suit, hence the Mecha Therion tagline, and makes chase across a number of different levels. So in terms of the gameplay, as I mentioned, it is a shoot 'em up, a horizontal shoot 'em up at that, with a 2.5D art style. You play as Mecha Therion and need to make your way across a number of stages, taking on a variety of enemies per stage before fighting an end of stage boss. You have three types of weapons. You have your main ranged weapon, you have a secondary ranged weapon, and you also have a melee attack. You are restricted in how often you can use the ranged attacks by an energy bar just below your health. If this bar does deplete, then you'll still be able to fire, at least with your primary ranged attack, albeit it's at a much lower rate and doesn't do much damage. In order to fill this bar back up, you must use your melee attack. This leads to quite an interesting risk-reward strategy where you'll want to fill that bar back up if it does start to deplete, but this does mean using your melee, which is quite slow, and it does take a while to work out the timings in terms of hitting the enemies, leaving you more vulnerable, but obviously it is necessary if you do want to boost your ranged weapon back up. Talking of the weapons themselves, there are a number of different ones at your disposal, not initially, but you will find them as you make your way through the game, generally for defeating bosses, and every time you reach a checkpoint within the game, you can land on said checkpoint and swap your loadout to try and find something that you feel is more appropriate for the action that you're currently facing. Now, one thing I really did like about the game is that I did feel that the weapons were different enough that I did want to swap them out at certain points. You have your standard Hellwraith, which is your more traditional fast rate of fire style gun, but then you have others that act more like shotguns or flamethrowers, for example, or even one that does damage to multiple enemies but obviously does less damage in return. I found that a number of times, particularly on boss battles, I was changing up my loadout to try and get maximum output of what I had and overcome the different challenges that these bosses gave me. As well as swapping out your weapons, you can also upgrade them, and you do this by using the blood points that you acquire by killing enemies. The more enemies you kill in quick succession boosts your combo meter and allows this to fill up quicker, earning you more of this capital. Again, it's a nice way to introduce risk-reward into what is already a difficult game, where you're not punished for not doing it, but you are rewarded for doing so, if that makes sense. Now, the stages themselves are pretty linear, although there are a few hidden sections here and there, as alongside these weapons you can pick other items up, more passive abilities that may allow you, for example, to charge up your melee weapon and throw it like a boomerang, or have the ability to bring any items that you find, such as health pickups, towards you magnetic style. In terms of health, you get 3 hit points, which does change things up from a more standard shoot 'em up where one hit will kill you, and it is a difficult game, I must say. I will say that it is fairly balanced because of the checkpoints that are laid out in a way that it never feels unfair in terms of how far you have to go till the next one. And whilst it's not a bullet hell by any stretch of the imagination, you will be overwhelmed at times by the number of enemies on screen, or find bosses that have a few different stages you have to beat, where defeat will mean having to start that boss again from the first section of that battle. There were a few spikes in difficulty, certainly a couple of bosses that I was pulling my hair out over, but on the whole I did want to keep playing and never felt a level of frustration above what you would expect playing this type of shoot 'em up in general. In terms of the controls, they are as you would expect for the most part. You can use either the stick or the D-pad in order to move across the screen, and the one main complaint I had was that you could set being able to turn around 180 degrees to face enemies that may be behind you to automatic, but when doing this you were at the mercy of when the game deemed this necessary, rather than it just happening when there were clearly enemies behind you. I started off with this automatic setting on, but found I had to switch to manual quite early because I was getting hit too often by this. Gameplay is certainly high octane. It does take remnants of the original Valfaris game and put them into this new style, and I will give the developers major credit for not just sticking to the tried and tested and taking the series in a different direction. They've done a very good job, to be fair, and gameplay gets 17 out of 20. Controls, minus that strange implementation of the turn feature, work very well, and they also get 17 out of 20. Now when it comes to the visuals, as I mentioned, it uses a 2.5D art style. Now the character sprites themselves are very reminiscent of the original Valfaris game, but you will notice that switch to 2.5D more so in the foreground objects, and there will be times where the camera is quite dynamic and it will shift almost as if Therion is turning around corners, and it does lead to some nice action moments where the camera perspective will change, increasing the sense of speed or urgency to that particular action sequence. I will say that I do feel the low res faux 3D sprite style doesn't quite mesh as well, for me at least, as the flat sprites of the original, but having said that, I do feel in the context of this game and what it's going for, obviously changing to a shoot 'em up, it does work very well. Onto the colour palette, and I do think this is an area where the game truly shines. You have some levels that are very gothic, with dark blues and blacks to emphasise this. Certain levels remind you of things such as Castlevania or Slain Back from Hell, one of the developers' other games. You can definitely see some of those references in there, but then you have other levels that really do look like alien worlds, such as from the series Alien itself. I think I commented on the original game, Valfaris, that there were levels that looked like they were set on LV-426 from Aliens, and I would say the same here. It has that biomechanical feel to it, very H.R. Geiger in some of its design, whilst also having an industrial feel of a living, working world, albeit set in a fantastical place. Other areas look a bit more serene. You really do get the impression of flying across a whole cosmos and experiencing different alien life forms and civilizations, all with completely different ways of living as you go on this quest to destroy your father. Performance wise, it runs at 60 frames per second and is nice and smooth. I didn't notice any major hiccups in terms of frame rate, and please be aware that some of the footage may have rendered at 30 frames per second. That's nothing to do with the game, that's because a lot of the time I was playing this whilst at Gamescom, which meant I had to use the 30-second screen capture capability of the Switch, which does capture that footage at 30. As best as I can, I did use proper capture software to represent the game fully, but being in a different country at the time wasn't always easy to do so. Now the soundtrack is a major part of Valfaris and Slain Back from Hell before it, in that obviously the game is heavily inspired by metal music. Now I'm not a fan of metal, I'll be the first to admit that, but even as someone that isn't, I could certainly appreciate the quality of the music on show and just how well it went with what you're seeing. Therion will headbang to the music, if it's called that, apologies if not, as he picks up the weapons that I mentioned earlier, and I did really enjoy some of the themes. There was one in particular, a really fantastic, almost like solo guitar riff, which I will play a bit of now. That I found really did immerse me in the world. Even in a game where you're having to keep your senses heightened, I was still drifting away to the music at the same time. Now my one biggest complaint with the music is the way that the loop is handled. Rather than being a continuous piece of music throughout the whole stage, it is on a loop, quite a long one. It's not particularly short, but it does end and leave you at times in moments of silence before it picks back up again. And obviously in a game as high octane as this, it is a bit awkward when you have those silent moments when there's so much going on screen. The visual style chosen certainly fits the theme of the game, and I did really enjoy the moments where the camera was a bit more dynamic. It gets 17 out of 20. Audio is definitely a strong point of the game, even if you are not into the type of music featured, and it gets 18 out of 20. Valfaris Mecha Therion costs £16.50 and regional equivalents are on your screen now. This is a little cheaper than the original Valfaris game, which was about £4 more expensive from memory, and I do feel that in terms of the production values you are getting good quality for the money that you pay. Being a shoot 'em up, it's not the longest experience, and it is a shoot 'em up that you can make your way through even if you're not particularly good or experienced with them. Not because it's easy, it's absolutely not, but I do feel because of the checkpoint system and the fact it has unlimited lives, most people will be able to get through by hook or by crook. In terms of replay value, it's a bit different from traditional shoot 'em ups where the value was in going for high scores. It's obviously more of a story based shoot 'em up this time round, but there are a few secrets to try to find, and I suppose you could attempt the game again with different combinations of weapons. I would say that replay value is probably on the lower side though, even though it is clearly a good game. Value for me gets 16 out of 20. To conclude, Valfaris Mecha Therion is a very good attempt at taking a series in a different direction. I was a bit unsure at first, despite the fact I really do enjoy shoot 'em ups, just because I was such a big fan of the original, and whilst I don't think this game hits that original for me, that's not to say it's a bad game by any stretch, and I did really start to get into it the further I went. There were just a couple of odd choices that do affect the score to a degree, but on the whole, if you like shoot 'em ups, or are just curious to see where the Valfaris series is going, then I would definitely recommend picking this one up. Valfaris Mecha Therion gets a SwitchUp score of 85%. Thank you everybody for watching this review. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do remember to leave a like if you did. Don't forget, if you are looking for eShop credit to pick this game up, or any other game for that matter, you can get your eShop cards over at our website, switchup.gg, and doing so will get you 5% of your purchase price back as cashback that you can then use against a future purchase. There are also other links down there to a variety of places, one of which is PlayAsia if you're looking to import any games. Again, use the link, use the code stated, and you get yourself 5% off of your order from there. A quick thank you to our patrons and our channel members for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. Take care, and until next time, happy gaming.